I love doing this show, and I think that's obvious because I do it every week and spend a lot of time digging into secret wrestling history, but I hate that I have to do it. Not that I hate making the show, but that we have to do this much work to find the real story of pro wrestling. That this thing that we love so much has lost so much to history and to the gods of the tape machine and the line item budget. Unlike other sports, pro wrestling's rich history on television is mostly gone as local stations and territorial promoters viewed their programs as unimportant pieces of content that could be used to give context for history, and also that sweet, sweet tape library money. But it would end up being taped over or sold or reused, or somehow some people would get some hands on it every once in a while, which is how we're able to get some of the cool clips you see every single week. Instead of thinking what could be, they thought of what will be, or in the case of Ole Anderson, spite and or not giving a good damn about the stuff, and he just chucked it in the trash. But it is a very pro wrestling thing for most of its history to just be that. A sport built on subterfuge with a talent base of professional liars who would often look to hide their tracks to avoid violent retribution from the fans or of their opponent, or for other less than stellar things pro wrestlers of that era are increasingly known for, as the ugly face of history has shown us time and time again. Historically speaking, I'm Matt Ryan, and this is the secret wrestling history of the man who made it possible for Cody Rhodes to be Cody Rhodes, and one man's Zelig-like journey through the world of professional wrestling at the height of the 1960s. When we last left you, Johnny Powers had left the Michigan territory after starting as Lord Anthony Lansdowne in his native Ontario, and now is making his claim in Pennsylvania, working for the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, a company less than a year into existence, featuring a burgeoning young world champion, Bruno Sammartino. Powers, who looked at Sammartino's predecessor, Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, as an inspiration, may have been considered a replacement for Rogers, who had been phased out of Capital Wrestling's WWF following his dropping the world title to Sammartino in just 48 seconds, as covered in our last episode.
And I didn't want to stay there for a long period of time. That was called homesteading. If you got over, you'd stay there for sometimes 2, 3, 4 years, sometimes a decade. And so they knew I wasn't coming to Homestead, and so I didn't get moved into. I went against Klondike Bills and a few folks like that, and so I didn't get in a position to get the matches that would get the best response. Where in the Sammartino time when they brought me in, they needed someone like Toots Munt, needed someone like a Powers, blonde counterpoint to a big bulldog type of Sammartino, barrel-chested and all that. They needed a flamboyant new Buddy Rogers type. And so they needed me, and I filled the spot. And because the spot was there to be filled, you get put in the circumstances that make you get over them. So it's not all about what you want to do. It's about getting the promoter and the booker put you in the place, and then once you're there, do you have the goods to carry the day?
And this hose it down, keep it moving mindset where you'd come in, get over, and get out would inevitably be the trend for heels like Powers, not only in the WWF, but for large swaths of the wrestling business until the territories would be put down in the 1980s for a confluence of reasons, some of which we've already discussed on this show. As we go on, you'll see Powers shift to more of the homesteading type due to his shift from being just talent to doing everything but selling the popcorn and programs, but we'll get to that later. It would be in the spring of 1964 when Powers would make his first appearance in the Pittsburgh end of the Capital Wrestling Loop, working for Rudy Miller, with cage match records indicating his first match, a win over Manuel Soto, in the studios of WIIC-TV on May 30th of 1964. When it came to heels in the territory, Powers was joining an interesting cavalcade to supplement the loss of Rogers the year prior. Perennial Northeastern talents such as Killer Kowalski and Gorilla Monsoon would start out on the antagonistic side of the street alongside former Oklahoma football player and future booker, promoter, and top guy Bill Watts, who had just made the switch from babyface to heel, alongside appearances from Freddie Blassie and the reformed Graham brothers as Dr. Jerry returned to the fold, despite his detest for Sammartino alongside Dan Parker, who his detest for was mentioned in last week's episode.
These were great times, actually, because for a young guy coming in, they actually billed me at 24 years of age. I was just turning 21. And to be around Kurt Kowalski was like an honor. He was like, him and Lou Thesz and Buddy Rogers were iconic to a youngster coming in the business. And so it was a great time.
But it was not all peaches and cream for the McMahon outfit as Argentino Rocca returned to the Northeast, wanting back in on the game. He found himself removed from amidst the battle for the Garden at the start of the decade, and Sammartino supplanting him as the definitive babyface draw. It would be Rocca partnering with Jim Crockett Sr. just over 20 years before his and McMahon's namesakes would battle in what would be known as the first national wrestling war of the modern era. Rocca and Crockett's world booking agency would utilize the top names from JCP and have television on WWOR Channel 9 emanating from the Sunnyside Gardens with DJ Lonny Starr as the host.
Valentine, 21 minutes past the hour of 8 o'clock. Belt Parkway is moderately heavy traffic. Jack Cedarbaum tells us a car broken down as they approach the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel just off Gowanus, so keep an eye out for that and skirt on around him without any difficulty this morning. 8:21 is the time. Yeah, boy. This is Clydesville. Here we go. Clyde McFadden and Little Bitty Pretty One. Happy hand clapping sound from Happy Radio #1 in New York.
Starr was very much his last name in the New York area, not only for his work on the radio, but in 1960, he'd be subject to Payola allegations following his leaving WNEW 1130 AM to WINS 1010 AM, as covered by the Daily News in the April 4th, 1960 edition from Anthony Marino and Henry Lee. Lonny Starr spins out after DA Payola quiz. After questioning by the district attorney's office in the Payola investigation, plump Lonny Starr, veteran disc jockey and wrestling announcer, has been fired from his radio and TV jobs with station WNEW that grossed him $1,005 weekly, the news was informed yesterday. Starr admitted that he visited the district attorney's office a couple of weeks ago, but insisted he was leaving his $800 a week radio job because of differences with the station over programming. John Sullivan, general manager of WNEW Radio, assured him Starr said that Payola was not the reason for cancellation of my contract. Sullivan agreed that the firing had been due to what he called reevaluation of the programming on the radio station. However, when pressed about Starr's quizzing downtown by the DA, he conceded you can say it's one of the factors. At the same time that WNEW Radio was reevaluating, Jack Lynn, program manager of WNEW TV, was reappraising the program concept of the Tuesday night wrestling show at the Sunnyside Gardens, which Starr announced for $205 weekly. Apparently, Starr was reporting grunts where there should have been groans, and he lost that job too. The firing was due to the program concept changes on wrestling on this station, Lynn said. An unexpected factor was the sudden dropping of Starr after 12 and a half years from his radio jockey show, when his contract had another 6 months to run. Sullivan admitted that the station had given him severance pay because of the reevaluation, but declined to say more. You should get it either from the DA's office or Starr, he said. Both the disc program reevaluation and the wrestling show program concept changes happened at the same time last Thursday when Sullivan and Lynn got together. If you're a New Yorker who grew up from the 1980s or even now in the 20s like me, you have every right to be confused by all of this due to 1010 wins up until this past year. The all-new station in New York and 1130 AM is now the flagship station for Bloomberg Radio, which, fun fact, was where I got my first real gig in broadcasting just over a decade and a half ago as a fill-in board operator and a couple of Ranger and Nick games here and there. It's not really important to the narrative, just a weird small world moment for me and a little bit of New York radio history, which I'm a fan of. But of course this guy was a wrestling announcer. He was a carny like the rest of us, I mean them. I just don't like being the second local pro wrestling announcer to work for that station, but I digress. Enough about me. This experiment wouldn't last that long, though, because McMahon, even though he wasn't an official member of the NWA, still had a lot of connections and protections due to his standing in the business, and he and Mont helping talent in the past and opening up different territories, especially Florida, and Crockett would soon be cautioned to politely fuck off from trying to help Rocca in his quest for revenge, in the same way Doyle and Barnett would be cautioned to not really try to poke at the NWA anymore. By August of that year, the TV from the Sunnyside Gardens would give way to house shows at the Bay Ridge Sports Center, which is not only where the partnership may have ended on June 15th of 1964, but is now a Harbor Fitness 6 blocks from where I went to high school, which continues to make this a really small world for me. 1 month after the Bay Ridge Sports Center would no longer see the likes of Lenny Montana, aka Luca Brasi of The Godfather, yes, he was a pro wrestler in the 60s, and talent like Gorgeous George Gigi, Powers would step into Forbes Field, home of the Pittsburgh Pirates and former home to the Pittsburgh Steelers, who moved into Pitt Stadium the year prior. Powers would walk into the ring in front of 15,000 fans to face Bruno Sammartino for the WWF World Championship.
Traditionally, territories will go outdoors to give the fans a break, hoping that it doesn't rain on them. But also the Civic Arena, I believe it didn't hold 15,000 people at that time. And this was breaks. 7/25. I was born March 20th. So I was just literally a few months into my 21st birthday. I literally could not rent a car yet because you couldn't over there until you're 25. So I had to catch cabs to get to my various places. And they'd look at me walking in and they'd see my certificate and birth certificate and passport and all at that time. I even had sometimes hard time checking into hotels because of my youngness. But here I was, Bruno Sammartino, and almost every move I can visualize again. First of all, you walk in, and I don't care what people say, if something's important to you, you have a fear in you, a fear of failure, a fear that you want to do your best, not let anybody down, especially yourself down. And I remember going in there, and I was so hyper that to calm myself down, I would turn around and I'd isolate on a fan or two, or I'd isolate on the referee for a little bit. I already knew what I was going to do with Sammartino, because Sammartino was hugely powerful, but he wasn't a very adept wrestler. I felt even at that stage I was a superior wrestler, a technician, that if I got him on the mat, especially if I put him face down so he could only punch the mat and not punch me out, because he was a powerful dude. He actually, Sonny Liston, who was a beast of a man, could not knock out Sammartino. It was hard. He was tough boy. But I knew mechanically, technically, he was not a superior wrestler to myself. So my job was to confuse him and move him around and get him out of his strongman moves, because he loved to come and he'd squat down like he's a wrestler, but he wasn't really a good wrestler. So I would throw some uppercuts at him. I'd baff him with a few right hands, and I'm actually left-handed, so my moves are off base. Lou Thesz was also the same way. And when you go against someone that's not typically right or left-handed, and he's left-handed and throwing shots, it throws him off a little bit. And so my job with him was to wear him out. He couldn't beat me. He didn't beat me. It's called COR, counter of ring, okay? He didn't beat me, but he beat me because I couldn't get back in the ring in time. I actually thought, and I'm not whining now, I think it was a little bit of a fast count. It was his hometown, basically, after Abruzzi and Lee Pittsburgh had adopted him as a native son. And I thought that, I think it was Izzy Modell at the time, the referee, I thought there was a little bit of a fast count on Powers, because I think they thought their boy was going to go down. And like anything else in politics, you don't want a champion who's drawn lots of money to get beat by some new kid that you don't know if you can control him or maneuver him around or whatever, or if he'll make all the dates or he'll not go off into somebody else's territory. But the answer is, it's like yesterday. And it made me, the 15,000, it was, I got calls from Toronto, I got calls from Sam Muchnick in the NWA, who was out of St. Louis and all that, and I was on my way. All I had to do is not make too many mistakes after that.
Even though Powers would have a rematch with Bruno later that summer and run the same angle back in Philadelphia that fall, by November of '64, Powers would find himself at the bottom of the card, which may have been his own doing.
That's a real good question. Actually, I pissed off Freddie Blassie. I went on an interview and I said, Freddie Blassie is older than... In fact, he's been around, I think, before God was invented. he went and bitched to the McMahons and whatever, and he said, don't need to have two blondes in this territory, and I went. To best of my knowledge, that's what I heard anyways by the second, the grapevine. But the bottom line is, it says Powers refused to break the power lock, which means I beat his ass. But so I got DQ'd. Remember, DQ doesn't hurt you. And you can get over sometimes and never win.
On New Year's Eve of 1964, Powers would return to his native Ontario and begin a run for Frank Tunney inside the vaunted Maple Leaf Gardens. And while Tunney would soon pair Sammartino back up with Powers, it would be 1 month later on January 31st that Powers would step inside the venue he'd make his own for the next decade or so.
And I was now starting to go into Buffalo territory, which was Pedro Martinez. And then I'd do a loop, and I eventually also in that year would go into Detroit territory. So I was working 3 territories in 1 year. So I was kind of an independent guy. No territory owned me. They tried, but it didn't happen. And Buffalo, I love Buffalo. People say, Buffalo, New York, gee, JP, someone say it's bad. It's the armpit of the United States. I made so much money there. I got talent. I got Pedro Martinez to mentor me as a promoter, to mentor me as a bookkeeper, and I mean a bookkeeper that understands the business and could not just be a promoter, but he knew how to handle numbers and all of that. As a matchmaker too, by a whole bunch of talent, and I love Buffalo.
So Powers is working Buffalo, Michigan, Detroit, which were different territories at the time, and Toronto leading into 1965, which is when Powers decided he was bored and asked Tunney for points in the territory.
In 65, I bought my first town. It was called Galt, and I was so anxious because I asked for points in Toronto territory from Frank Tunney. He says, no, just be a wrestler. I said, listen, Frank, I get up in the morning at 10 o'clock. I go work out for a couple hours. I have a little meal. I chase a woman in the afternoon. If I can catch her, that's cool. I go work in the evening. I tap dance in the ring for anywhere from 10 minutes to 60 minutes, sometimes 2 hours. I go have a meal. I chase a woman. That's boring. I want to be a promoter. He says, no. I said, find me somewhere. So I went and promoted a little town called Sutton. And then I bought from a guy named...
Well, are you getting ahead of us here? Is this 65 or are we going...
65. They allowed me to run the town as a summer town, which is Sutton. And then I bought Galt, G-A-L-T. It's part of Cambridge now.
Okay.
Ontario for, I think, a large amount of $2,500.
And how old are you at this time?
22.
At 22 years old, Powers is already someone who's wrestled and main evented in ballparks that have seen World Series games, homes of the Stanley Cup Finals, and is bored, so he wants to promote towns. It continues to show you have to be a certain type of human being to be a professional wrestler, because holy shit. Later in 65, Powers would have a chance to face the iconic Whipper Billy Watson in the main event inside Buffalo's War Memorial Auditorium, which for a guy like Powers was a huge moment for him.
He was Canada's Babe Ruth. He did so much for charity. He came in the late 40s and the early 50s into 60s, and all of us loved him. He was Babe Ruth times 10. He was Ted Williams plus Babe Ruth. Unbelievable. And so for me to go and beat him, it was like an honor. And so I see he got counted out of the ring, so he fell out of the ring. But that meant I was on my way. That meant the promoters, because remember that time I'm not a booker and I'm not a promoter. I'm just a wrestler trying to get up the food chain or get blown out of the business. And so they had sacrificed Whipper Watson to me, which was... It was like, I would be still 22 plus 1 month, and here I went and get in the ring against Whipper Watson, who was a big hero in Buffalo. He was as big a hero in Buffalo as he was in Toronto and Canada, and he got counted out of the ring.
I've been trying to work out a modern comp for Powers since we've been introducing him into the series, and I feel like this portion here will give you some options alongside the other one I gave you before.
Yeah, I got disqualified, but remember, that's not a loss, and plus, If I would have been allowed to beat him, I probably would have beat him if I could. But I didn't think I was...
Whoa. What do you mean allowed to beat him?
Well, because the promoters wanted to protect Sammartino. He was Vince McMahon Sr.'s champion being rented out to Toronto. And so the answer is that for me to beat him, I probably would have got a baseball bat in the head coming in the dressing room. So that would have been too cool. I would have kicked my ass out of the business real fast, and yet I still didn't want to lay down for him, so I got DQ'd, which means I would try to dominate the match, beat the shit out of him, and get DQ'd.
So, JP, before the match, would you tell the promoter, they say, hey, you're going... I asked you this before. You're going down 1, 2, 3. You say, no, I'm not?
Well, by then they knew not to ask me.
Okay, fair enough.
It wasn't going to happen. They knew the Powers kid is not going to lay down in the middle of the ring unless he wants to.
I mean, let's be realistic. You're 22 years old. Bruno's the world champion, or at least WWF champion.
Yeah.
And you would think this match would end in a pinfall. You losing.
I know that's what they wanted, but it didn't happen.
Okay, fair enough.
Now, whether you're a piper, a pauper, a punk, or popular beyond expectation, refusing to job to the world champion of a promotion is a wild move, especially for someone who's just 22. You throw in the fact this guy is without the support of a major booking office, is working in some of the biggest towns in wrestling completely independently. Powers certainly had his own kingdom. If not, he had one hell of a dashing fiefdom. But then, a watershed moment for Powers as he nearly meets an untimely end on his way to the matches.
Yeah, I was driving from Toronto with, remember I mentioned Magda Fabula, a beautiful Hungarian girl last show?
Right.
And she was in the passenger seat. I had a gold Barracuda. It was a jazzy little car.
Yeah.
And we didn't wear seatbelts at that time. Someone came in from a side road. I hit the gravel. I ended up hitting a concrete abutment at 45 miles an hour. I almost flipped over. I got a gash right across my forehead, and she went through the windshield and lived.
No.
And so I was so cut up, the doctors wouldn't let me fight.
Uh-oh, windshield. What happened to her?
Oh, she got stitches from eyebrow to eyebrow, and still looked good afterwards, but not quite the same. It scared the heck out of me because I made a mistake. There was no seat belts, and I had a choice to put my hand in front of her chest to block it. And then just as I hit the concrete abutment, I reached over and grabbed both hands on the steering wheel. I hit so much, I broke a steering wheel. My knee went into the radio, 4 inches into the radio in the dash. I was so angry because I thought she had died. I seen her in my mind's eye, slow motion, because when you think you're facing death, it's a very, very strange world, and I thought I was going to die. And so I see her going through the air, hitting the windshield, head comes back. I looked over, and she was totally knocked out, and I thought she was dead. I was so angry, I tore, and this is no joke, and this is a real deal, I tore the door open enough to climb out, and the cops caught me running down the middle, screaming at the guy that had left the scene of the accident. And they caught me about 1.5 miles. I had my whole suit was bloody, my forehead's open, and my knee is torn apart because I put it into the radio to block my fall. Because I thought someone just killed my gal.
Were you two dating at the time?
Yeah, she was my best gal.
Next time on Historically Speaking, we see Powers' power continue to rise in the Rust Belt as pro wrestling's maps continue to be drawn and redrawn amidst the NWA's gerrymandering and territories taking hold not only in the United States, but across the globe. Historically Speaking is a production of the Intergalactic Sports Network and executive produced by Ember Media. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, rate, review, and all that other stuff as we continue to provide secret wrestling history and figure out how deep this rabbit hole goes. I'm Matt Ryan. Until next week, bye!